Rachel Morin was a woman of incredible strength and resilience, balancing the challenges of raising 5 children while maintaining her passion for fitness and an active social life. Born and raised in the small, tight-knit town of Bel Air, Maryland, Rachel was well-known and well-loved by those around her. Her magnetic personality and vibrant spirit made her the type of person people were naturally drawn to. Her children were her world, and she worked hard to provide for them, despite the obstacles that came her way. To those who knew her, Rachel was a symbol of determination and hope, even when life seemed impossibly difficult. Rachel's commitment to her children was mirrored by her dedication to fitness. Fitness had become not only a way to stay physically healthy, but also a means to find inner peace. She often ran to clear her mind, finding solace in the natural beauty of her surroundings. Living near the Ma and Pa Heritage Trail, she found it to be the perfect place to escape the stresses of life. The trail, surrounded by trees and streams, was a serene place where Rachel felt safe. Little did she know that this very path, which had provided so much peace, would soon become the scene of her tragic end. In the months leading up to her death, Rachel had been navigating a new relationship with Richard Tobin, a man with a complex and troubled past. Tobin was a former convict, having spent time behind bars for crimes including domestic violence, disorderly conduct, and other infractions. He had been working to turn his life around and had met Rachel at a time when both were looking for new beginnings. Their relationship was still in its early stages, filled with passion but also hints of instability. There were moments of happiness shared between them, but tensions were also evident. Despite these tensions, Rachel had continued to move forward, focusing on her children and her personal growth. On the evening of August 5, 2023, Rachel left her home for what was supposed to be a routine jog along the Ma and Pa Heritage Trail. It was a warm summer evening, and the trail, typically bustling with runners and walkers, was quieter at this hour. Rachel was accustomed to the route, having run it many times before. She knew the area well and had no reason to fear. She posted a message on social media earlier that day, indicating she was heading out for a run, one of the many small updates she often shared with her followers. It was meant to be a normal evening, one where she could clear her mind and return home to her family refreshed. However, when Rachel didn't return that night, alarm bells started ringing. Richard Tobin was the first to raise the alarm. He called the police, his voice tinged with worry, explaining that Rachel hadn't come back from her run. His concerns were valid. It wasn't like Rachel to be gone so long without checking in. Her children were at home, waiting for her, and as time passed, the dread of something being terribly wrong grew. The police quickly responded, launching a search along the trail. The next morning, on August 6th, search teams discovered Rachel's body in a remote, wooded section of the Ma and Pa Heritage Trail. The discovery was devastating. Rachel had been brutally murdered, and her body showed clear signs of a violent struggle. It was a gruesome scene that immediately ruled out any possibility of an accidental death. Harford County Sheriff's deputies worked swiftly to secure the area, but the horror of what they had found would haunt them for a long time. As news of Rachel's murder spread, the entire community was thrown into shock and grief. Bel Air, a town where violent crime was rare, suddenly found itself grappling with an unimaginable loss. Rachel's friends and family were devastated, struggling to comprehend how something so horrific could happen in their peaceful community. Her children, left without their mother, were taken in by relatives as they tried to come to terms with the incomprehensible. The investigation into Rachel's death began immediately, with detectives from the Harford County Sheriff's Office working tirelessly to uncover any leads. The brutality of the crime led investigators to believe that this was not a random act of violence. The personal nature of the attack indicated that Rachel may have known her killer, which led them to take a closer look at those closest to her. Richard Tobin, as her boyfriend and the person who had reported her missing, was an obvious person of interest. Tobin, however, quickly professed his innocence. He took to social media, posting a lengthy message mourning Rachel's death and vehemently denying any involvement. He claimed that he had loved Rachel deeply and was devastated by her loss. Despite his declarations, the public remained skeptical. Tobin's criminal past made him an easy target for suspicion, and many believed that his history of violence could not be ignored. As the media began covering the case, Tobin became a focal point, with reporters and true crime enthusiasts speculating on his possible involvement. However, as investigators delved deeper into Rachel's life, they began to uncover new information that would take the case in an unexpected direction. Rachel's relationships had been complicated, with several past partners who had raised red flags. While none of them were immediately linked to her murder, it became clear that Rachel had been involved in emotionally charged situations that could have escalated. As investigators interviewed her friends and ex-boyfriends, a picture began to form of a woman who had been navigating difficult personal circumstances. But the real breakthrough came in the form of DNA evidence. Forensic teams had collected DNA from the crime scene, and when they ran it through national databases, they found a match. The DNA belonged to an unidentified suspect connected to a violent home invasion in Los Angeles. In that case, the suspect had broken into a home, brutally attacked a female victim, and fled. The connection to this other crime stunned the investigators and the public alike. It suggested that Rachel's murder was not a crime of passion or a domestic dispute, but rather the work of a predator, a potential serial killer who had traveled across the country, leaving a trail of violence in his wake. This revelation sent waves of fear through the Bel Air community. Suddenly, the idea that Rachel had been targeted by someone she knew seemed less likely. Instead, the public was confronted with the terrifying possibility that a violent predator had been stalking their town. Women who had once felt safe running on the Ma and Pa Heritage Trail now avoided it entirely, gripped by fear that the killer could still be out there, watching. The quiet town of Bel Air, where crime was rare, had been thrust into the national spotlight, becoming the latest chapter in America's long and troubling history of violence against women. As law enforcement worked tirelessly to track down the suspect, the case drew increasing media attention. National news outlets covered the story extensively, while true crime podcasts and YouTubers dissected every detail of the investigation. Speculation ran rampant, with amateur sleuths forming their own theories about who the killer might be. Social media was flooded with posts about Rachel, with people from all over the world expressing their condolences and offering their thoughts on the case. Amidst the media frenzy, Rachel's family was left to deal with their grief in a very public way. Her mother, Patty, became the family's spokesperson, appearing on television and giving interviews about her daughter's life and the devastating impact her death had on the family. Patty spoke about Rachel's love for her children, her dedication to fitness, and the hole that her murder had left in all their lives. She pleaded for justice, hoping that the person responsible would be caught and held accountable. Meanwhile, the investigation continued to focus on the DNA evidence that linked Rachel's case to the Los Angeles home invasion. The FBI was brought in to assist, and authorities from Maryland and California began working together to piece together the suspect's movements. They tracked his activities, looking for any pattern that could indicate where he might strike next. It was clear that this was not the first time the suspect had committed such a crime, and the fear was that it would not be the last. As the investigation progressed, more details about the suspect's violent tendencies emerged. In the Los Angeles case, he had broken into the home of a woman who was alone at the time. He assaulted her, leaving her badly injured, before fleeing the scene. The attack had been quick, brutal, and calculated, much like the way Rachel had been murdered. Investigators began to suspect that the suspect had been traveling across the country, targeting vulnerable women in different states. In Bel Air, the tension was palpable. Residents who had once felt safe now looked over their shoulders, wondering if the killer was still in their midst. The Ma and Pa Heritage Trail, once a place of peace and solitude, became a haunting reminder of the violence that had taken place there. Flowers, candles, and photographs were left along the trail as makeshift memorials for Rachel. But even these tributes couldn't erase the sense of fear that now gripped the community. The search for the suspect continued for months, with law enforcement agencies working tirelessly to bring him to justice. Tips poured in from across the country, with people claiming to have seen him or to have information about his whereabouts. However, despite their best efforts, the suspect remained elusive, moving through the country like a shadow. Then, in a surprising turn of events, a tip from a vigilant citizen led authorities to a suspect in an entirely different part of the country. The man, whose DNA matched the evidence found at both the Los Angeles home invasion and Rachel Morin's murder, was arrested in a small town. His arrest brought a wave of relief to the people of Bel Air and beyond, as they could finally begin to process the trauma of what had happened. The identity of the suspect in Rachel Morin's murder was eventually revealed after months of exhaustive investigative work. The man responsible for the crime was identified as John Michael Lopez, a transient criminal with a long history of violence and sexual assault. Lopez had spent much of his life drifting between states, living under the radar and committing crimes ranging from burglary to violent assaults. His criminal record, which spanned multiple states, painted a picture of a deeply disturbed individual with a penchant for preying on vulnerable women. He had managed to evade capture for years by constantly moving, using fake identities, and exploiting gaps in law enforcement communication between states. It wasn't until the DNA collected from Rachel's crime scene was matched to the DNA from the unsolved Los Angeles home invasion that Lopez's criminal history came into sharper focus. Lopez had been involved in numerous violent incidents over the years, most of which followed a similar pattern. He would target women who were alone, attack them violently, and leave little to no trace except for his DNA. The match between the DNA found at Rachel Morin's crime scene and the one linked to the Los Angeles case opened a Pandora's box of other unsolved crimes, leading investigators to believe that Lopez could be responsible for more than a dozen other assaults and potentially even other murders. His ability to evade capture for so long was due in part to his nomadic lifestyle, frequently changing locations and maintaining a low profile while committing heinous acts in different communities. This revelation sent shockwaves through not only Bel Air, but also the law enforcement community, as Lopez's capture finally offered a chance to solve multiple cases that had gone cold for years. When Lopez was finally apprehended in a small, rural town in the Midwest, he appeared disheveled and disoriented, but he showed no signs of remorse for the crimes he had committed. His arrest was the culmination of a nationwide manhunt, with tips from various citizens and efforts from multiple law enforcement agencies finally leading to his capture. As authorities delved deeper into his past, it became clear that Lopez had been living on the fringes of society for decades, moving from state to state, living in abandoned buildings, and working odd jobs under false names. Despite the overwhelming evidence linking him to Rachel's murder, Lopez initially denied any involvement. However, the DNA evidence, combined with witness statements from previous crimes, made it impossible for him to escape the tightening noose of justice. The trial that followed was one of the most highly publicized in recent memory. The courtroom was packed with members of the media, as well as Rachel's friends, family, and supporters. The prosecution laid out their case methodically, presenting the DNA evidence that linked the suspect to both crimes. Forensic experts testified about the science behind the DNA match, while detectives recounted the details of the investigation that had led to the suspect's arrest. Among the most emotionally charged moments of the trial were the victim impact statements. Rachel's family took the stand, speaking through tears about the void her death had left in their lives. Her children, now left without a mother, struggled to express their pain. They spoke about the way their lives had changed forever, how they would never hear their mother's voice again or feel her embrace. The courtroom was silent as the family shared their memories, their love for Rachel shining through every word. The defense attempted to argue that the DNA evidence was circumstantial, raising questions about the possibility of contamination or misinterpretation. However, the prosecution's case was airtight. In the end, the jury was quick to deliver their verdict. After only a few hours of deliberation, they found Lopez guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, sexual assault, and multiple other charges related to his pattern of violent crimes. The judge, recognizing the heinous nature of Lopez's actions and his complete lack of remorse, sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Rachel's family, the conviction provided a sense of justice, but it could never fully heal the wounds left by her tragic death. Still, knowing that the man who had stolen Rachel's life would never walk free again offered some measure of closure for those who loved her. For Rachel's family, the verdict brought a sense of justice, but not closure. No amount of prison time could ever bring Rachel back, and the pain of her loss would remain with them for the rest of their lives. But there was solace in knowing that her killer had been caught, and that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, unable to hurt anyone else. The aftermath of the trial saw continued media attention on the case, as journalists and true crime enthusiasts continued to dissect the details. Rachel's story became part of a larger conversation about violence against women, public safety, and the ways in which communities could protect themselves from predators like the one who had taken her life. In Bel Air, the Ma and Pa Heritage Trail was eventually reopened to the public, though it would never be the same. A permanent memorial was erected in Rachel's honor, reminding all who visited of the life that had been lost there. It served as both a tribute to Rachel and a reminder of the importance of vigilance and community. Rachel Morin's murder was not just a tragedy for her family, but for the entire community and beyond. It highlighted the fragility of life and the devastating impact that violence can have on those left behind. But it also showed the strength of a community that came together in the face of horror, determined to remember Rachel not for the way she died, but for the way she lived. Full of love, energy, and a spirit that could never truly be extinguished.